Hold on. Before you scroll past this, I need you to stay right here. 'Cause what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that sounds made up until you realize it actually happened to you or your coworker or your cousin or somebody you know who gave everything to a job that smiled to their face while sharpening a knife behind their back. I got fired. And the people who did it thought they were being smart. They were not being smart. By the time this story ends, a CEO was reassigned to a fake department, a head of operations had quietly handed in her resignation, a board of directors had voted to write me a check for nearly $7 million, and I was sitting on a hotel balcony in Miami watching the ocean, drinking something cold and feeling like the freest person alive. This is how that happened. My name is Maya Carter. And I need to tell you about the day I walked into a building knowing I was about to get fired, and walked out of it with the most expensive clause in company history already ticking. It was a Tuesday in February. Chicago. Cold enough that the air felt like it had a personal grudge against you. I pushed through the revolving door of Vantage Tech Solutions, a mid-sized tech consulting firm in the downtown loop, and I knew before I'd taken 3 steps inside that something was off. The front desk attendant, a young woman named Priya who had greeted me every single morning for 4 years with a warm smile and a "Good morning, Miss Carter," would not look at me. Her eyes were locked on her computer screen like she was studying for the most important exam of her life. People who have nothing to hide look at you when you walk in. Priya was hiding something. I hadn't even unzipped my coat when my phone buzzed against my hip. One notification. One subject line. Mandatory performance review, 9:30 a.m., conference room B7 urgent. All caps. No greeting. No body text. No signature. Like whoever sent it couldn't be bothered to pretend it was anything other than what it was. Before I tell you what happened in that conference room, and I promise you it gets wild, let me tell you what they were trying to take from me. I had just finished 14 consecutive quarters of growth for this company. 3.5 years. Every target hit. Every benchmark cleared. Not barely, comfortably, consistently, and in some cases so far above projections that the quarterly report started to look like I was inflating the numbers. 3 weeks before this Tuesday morning, I had personally closed the Drayton Forsyth account. A deal I built from scratch over 9 months, piecing it together call by call, meeting by meeting, until it landed $31 million in projected partnership revenue over the next 4 years. I had literally sketched the first pitch on a napkin at a coffee shop downtown. That napkin is framed in my home office today, right next to my MBA diploma and a photo of my grandmother. $31 million. 14 quarters of flawless results. And my equity bonus, the one they had promised me, signed off on and initialed on every page, was scheduled to vest the very next morning at 9 a.m. 23 hours from right now. So when that all-caps meeting invite landed on my phone without explanation, I didn't panic. I already knew exactly what was happening. They were going to try to fire me before the money cleared. Pause right here for a second. I need to know, are you watching this from work right now? Drop your city and what time it is in the comments. I want to know where the silent revenge family is tuning in from today. Go ahead, I'll wait. Sandra Briggs's office door was cracked when I walked past it. Sandra was my direct supervisor, head of strategic operations, and she had a very specific tone of voice she used when she was doing something that made her feel guilty. I'd heard it before when she pulled a junior analyst off a project she'd spent 6 weeks on and handed the credit to somebody else. Low. Soft. Carefully flat. Like she was delivering bad news about somebody's dog. I caught 2 words drifting through the crack as I walked by. Already approved. 2 words. That's all I needed to confirm what I already suspected. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. I went straight to my office on the 3rd floor, locked the door behind me, and walked to my desk. Bottom left drawer. The one with the small combination lock that nobody had ever asked about. I opened it and pulled out a sealed manila folder. Inside was my original employment contract. 11 pages. Renegotiated the previous spring after I closed back-to-back quarters that put us above our annual target by March. 3 rounds of revisions with the company's legal team and a private attorney I'd hired on my own, a sharp woman named Dana Holt, who I paid out of pocket and who was worth every cent. Dana was the one who said to me, during our second late-night phone call over a shared Google Doc, that the language I was pushing for was unusually strong for an incentive package. I told her that was the whole point. I flipped to page 8. Found the clause. Read it once slowly. Then again. Clause 14b. Still there. Every word intact. Marcus Webb's initials, my CEO, in the bottom right corner. Sandra Briggs's initials right next to his. And mine, smaller and neater, just below. 3 signatures. 3 sets of initials. 11 pages that every single one of them had agreed to and nobody had bothered to actually read after signing. That was their mistake. And it was about to be a very expensive one. If you already know where this is going, smash that like button right now and stick around because it gets better. Way better. I folded the papers, slid them into my leather portfolio, and stood up. Checked myself in the small mirror behind my office door. Straightened my blazer. Took 1 slow breath in, 1 slow breath out. Then I walked to conference room B7. The walk took me past the company's big decorative mural on the 4th floor, a massive backlit piece that Marcus had commissioned after they closed their Series C funding round. Flashy and loud. Innovation lives here, it said in gold letters. The mural had 12 painted figures all reaching towards some glowing horizon. I had closed more deals than any of them. None of the figures looked like me. Kept walking. The blinds in B7 were drawn when I arrived, which they never were. That told me everything. Through the frosted glass, I could count 3 figures inside before I even opened the door. I pushed it open. Sandra was sitting at the head of the table, back rigid, face arranged into something that was trying hard to look like regret, and mostly looked like a poker player who knew they were holding a weak hand. On her right was Pam Greer, the company's HR operations manager. On Sandra's left was a man I had never seen before. New face, clean suit, a folder in front of him with his hands folded on top of it. He looked like he'd been hired specifically to absorb awkward situations. No laptops open. No water on the table. No printed performance data anywhere in sight. Just 3 people in a room that had clearly been prepared for one purpose only. Maya. Sandra pulled my name out like she was buying time. Thank you so much for coming in on short notice. Of course, I said. I always make time for my team. Nobody smiled. She gestured to the chair across from her. I didn't sit. I stood at the edge of the table and waited. There was a single typed sheet in front of her. I had a pretty solid guess about what was on it. She cleared her throat. I'll get straight to the point. Company is going through a significant restructuring and your position is being eliminated effective immediately. This has been decided at the leadership level and it's final. Leadership. That was the word she used. Which meant Marcus, who hadn't bothered to show up for this moment despite the fact that I had personally built the account relationships that funded a large portion of his last 2 annual bonuses. I nodded slowly. Once. Understood, I said. Sandra blinked. She'd expected something else. Tears, maybe. A raised voice. Some kind of scene she could describe in a written incident report later. Her face cycled through a micro-expression of genuine confusion before she could smooth it back out. She didn't know me at all. We'll need your badge, she said quietly. I unclipped it from my blazer. Set it on the table between us. Smiled. Anything else? There wasn't. And just like that, according to every piece of paper in that room, I was no longer a senior director of strategic partnerships at Vantage Tech Solutions. But here's what they didn't know. What none of them had even thought to check. Clause 14b was already awake. I left conference room B7 the way you leave a place you've already mentally checked out of. No drama. No scene. I handed over the badge and walked. Sandra stayed behind, probably to debrief with Pam about how shockingly calm I'd been, which I imagine was not reassuring for them. I didn't go back to my office. I took the east stairwell up to the 6th floor. Legal and compliance. I need to tell you about a man named Dev Sharma because he matters a lot to what happens next. Dev was 29 years old, junior compliance counsel, and one of maybe 3 people in that entire building I actually trusted. He had shadowed me during the Drayton-Forsyth negotiation, and I had watched him turn into a genuinely sharp attorney over the course of a year. Quick thinker. Careful reader. Kind of person who spots the thing everyone else skimmed past. I'd invested time in him the way I'd invested time in a handful of people at Vantage, not because it was my job, but because good people deserve to have someone in their corner. When he looked up from his desk and saw me walking toward him, his face did several things at once. I set the portfolio on his desk before he could say anything. "They terminated me this morning," I said. "Effective immediately. No cause cited, no severance discussion, no mention of the incentive agreement. I need you to look at Clause 14B. He opened the folder. Started reading. I watched his eyes move across the page once, then a second time, moving slower. He sat very still the way people do when their brain is working faster than their body. "The 24-hour window," he said quietly. "They fired me 23 hours before the vest," I said. He sat back. Let out a breath. "This isn't just the base payout," he said carefully. "This clause triggers full equity acceleration. If they terminated you inside this window with no documented cause, they don't just owe me the bonus. They owe me the multiplier. 1.5 times base salary, plus damages, plus they can't force arbitration because that right belongs to me and me alone." Dev stared at the page for another few seconds. "Maya, did they even read this clause when they signed it?" I thought about the meeting where we'd finalized the contract amendments. Marcus had flipped through the pages, initialing each one, while simultaneously texting on his phone and commenting to Sandra that we were going to be late for the 4 o'clock call. He'd made a joke about how long the document was. "No," I said. "They did not." Dev's expression was equal parts horrified and impressed. "Who else knows you're up here? Right now?" "Nobody. I'd like to keep it that way for a little while. But I need this escalated to Claire Novak in lead compliance. Quietly. I'd rather it builds from the inside out before anything goes public." He nodded and reached for his phone. "I'll call her right now." I stood to leave. "Dev," I said at the door. "You're on the right side of this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He was already dialing. "Drop a comment right now if you've ever been underestimated at work. One word is enough. Let's see how many of us are in this thing together." Here's the part of this story that most people don't talk about. The logistics are the easy part. Having the right paperwork, knowing your clause numbers, staying calm when they hand you the termination notice, all of that is learnable. You can prepare for it. You can plan for it. The hard part is the elevator ride down. That 30 seconds where you're standing in the steel box watching the floor numbers tick down, and the adrenaline thins out just enough to let the real feelings through. I thought about the photo I had on my desk, me and my grandmother, the day I got my first real job offer out of grad school. She had this huge smile on her face, and I remember thinking she looked proud in a way that made me want to cry. She passed away 2 years into my time at Vantage. She never saw the Drayton-Forsyth deal close. She knew I'd close something like it, though. She always did. "They can take a lot of things, baby," she used to say. "But they can't take what you already know." I held that thought in the elevator. Let it steady me. Then I put everything else in a box, set the box on a shelf in the back of my mind, and walked out of that building like I was headed to lunch. 4 blocks from the Vantage Tech headquarters on Wacker Drive, there's a coffee shop called the Meridian. Good espresso, quiet corners, and fast enough Wi-Fi to run a war from a corner table. I'd been there enough times that the barista, a guy named Oscar with very strong opinions about coffee ratios, Had my order ready before I reached the counter. I sat down, opened my laptop, and waited. The first message came in at 11:14 a.m. From Claire Novak, Lead Compliance Counsel. Subject, Clause 14B, receipt confirmed. Ms. Carter, your annotated documentation has been received and logged with a confirmed timestamp. We are currently in review. Will advise shortly. Cold. Professional. Kind of message that means somebody just reads something they weren't expecting and is choosing their next words very carefully. I opened my encrypted backup app. 3 full copies of the original contract. Every amendment, every page, every set of initials with metadata showing the date, time, and device used for each signature. I also had a screen recording of the digital signing session where Marcus had clicked through the pages and clicked approve on every single one without pausing on Clause 14B for more than 4 seconds. 4 seconds. That was how long he spent on the language that was about to cost his company nearly $7 million. And here's the twist none of them saw coming. When I'd renegotiated the contract the previous spring, I'd included a subsection, Clause 14B2, in the small print at the bottom of page 9, that tied my payout multiplier to the company's current equity valuation at the time of termination, not the valuation from when the contract was originally signed. Company's valuation had grown significantly in the 16 months since then, which meant nobody at Vantage had run the actual current math yet. They were about to. On the 6th floor of Vantage Tech, Claire Novak had read the clause twice, turned a shade of pale that belongs specifically to people who've just confirmed their worst fear in writing, and immediately called James Ogilvy, the company's outside general counsel. James read it, set it down, picked it up, and read the subsection. Then he called his associate. Then he called Marcus's executive assistant and requested an emergency leadership convening within the hour. In the HR department, Sandra Briggs had apparently walked in like the building was on fire. I learned the details of this from Pam Greer herself several weeks later over coffee. Pam felt genuinely bad about her role in the morning's events, and she was the type of person who processed guilt by telling the truth. I liked her for it. Sandra had apparently demanded documentation. Write-ups. Performance flags. Coaching notes. Anything that would create the appearance of justified cause. Pam had scrolled through my employee file with the specific expression of someone looking for something they already know isn't there. Sandra, Pam had said finally. She has a spotless record. Not one verbal warning. Not one written caution. Not a single documented concern in 4 years. Sandra had reportedly sat down very hard in a nearby chair. And somewhere on the 6th floor, Dev was handing Claire Novak a folder that was about to set off a chain reaction nobody in that building was ready for. Now let me tell you about Jasmine Reyes because she is one of my favorite parts of this whole story. Jasmine was a 26-year-old data analyst on my former team. Brilliant. Methodical. Kind of person who notices everything and says nothing until the moment saying something actually counts. She'd watched me build the Drayton Forsyth deal from across the open floor plan. She'd also watched what happened in the all-hands meetings afterward when the credit got distributed, and how the contributions of certain people had a habit of getting absorbed, repackaged, and presented upward under different names. For months before I got fired, Jasmine had started quietly keeping a file. On her own. On her personal encrypted drive. Without anyone asking her to. A full timeline, email chains, meeting notes, internal Slack messages she'd screenshotted because something in her gut told her they mattered. A clear, sourced, organized record of a pattern, the same pattern I'd been living inside of for years but had never had documented from the outside looking in. She texted me at 11:47 that Tuesday morning. I've been keeping receipts. You're going to want them. Coffee? I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I typed back, Meridian. Corner table. Bring everything. She walked in 30 minutes later with a laptop bag over her shoulder and the energy of someone who had been waiting a long time to do the right thing and had finally been handed permission. We sat together for 2 hours. I went through everything she had, page by page. What she'd built didn't change my legal position. Clause 14B was already locked and loaded. But Jasmine's file was something else entirely. It was evidence of a culture. A documented pattern of behavior by people who ran this company. Kind of thing that, when it lands on a board of directors' desk, doesn't just raise questions about a contract dispute. It raises questions about everything. I looked across the coffee table at her when I was done reading. "Why did you do all this?" I asked. "You didn't have to." She shrugged one shoulder. "You spent 6 months teaching me how to pitch to enterprise clients because you said it would help my career. It wasn't even your job." She closed her laptop. "I figured I owed you one. This is the moment in the story where I need you to do something. Share this video with one person right now, just one, who has ever been undervalued at their job. They need to hear this. Go ahead, I'll be here when you get back." By Friday morning, the Vantage Tech boardroom had become the most uncomfortable place in the entire building. Claire Novak stood at the head of the table with a stack of printed documents and the expression of a person who is simultaneously doing their job and watching a slow-motion disaster they tried to prevent. Marcus Webb sat across from Sandra Briggs. The CFO, Robert Haynes, was on his second cup of coffee and his third mental calculation of the same terrible number. Richard Okafor, the head of corporate strategy and one of the more clear-eyed people in that company's leadership, sat near the end of the table looking like a man sorting through exactly how much of this he wanted to be associated with. There were 2 other board members in the room who I will not name because, frankly, they were barely present even when they were sitting right there. Claire presented the clause documentation. Read it aloud. Walked through the signature chain. Presented Dev's compliance intake report, which confirmed that I had notified 3 internal channels within 90 minutes of leaving the building, before the company had even uploaded my exit paperwork. "She filed before you filed," Claire said. Simply. Without emphasis. Which somehow made it worse. Then Robert Haynes put his papers on the table and said the number. With the Clause 14B multiplier applied to the current equity valuation, not the valuation at the time of the original contract signing, the current valuation, the total payout obligation is $6,812,000. The room went quiet in a very particular way. "We were trying to avoid paying out $4 million, Sandra said slowly. "And you triggered nearly 7, Claire replied. Marcus looked like someone had poured cold water down the back of his shirt. "Can we counter? Offer her half? Clean NDA, no statement, everybody moves on?" Claire paused. "She hasn't made any demands." "What do you mean?" "I mean she submitted her documentation, notified our internal compliance team, and has not reached out since. No demands. No lawyer letters. No social media. Nothing." Claire looked at him steadily. "She doesn't need to ask for anything. She already knows what the clause says. She's waiting for us to do the math." Marcus leaned forward. "She planned this whole thing." Richard Okafor, from the end of the table, said one sentence without looking up from his notes. "She protected herself. From us. And it worked." The silence that followed lasted a long time. The board voted. Full payout to be processed within 30 days. Formal acknowledgement of contract breach. A written commitment that no defamatory language about the circumstances of Maya Carter's separation would be attached to any future reference or record. Marcus Webb was reassigned within 2 weeks. His new title, and I need you to understand I am not making this up, was Vice President of Internal Vision and Culture Alignment, a role that came with an impressive badge, a nice office number on the directory, and absolutely no one reporting to him. Sandra Briggs handed in her resignation 9 days after the board vote. The company put out a brief statement about her pursuing new opportunities. Nobody inside those walls believed a word of it. The settlement confirmation email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was sitting on the balcony of a hotel in Miami. Warm air, ocean smell, coffee that had gone a little cold because I'd been on the phone. I picked up my phone and read it. $6,812,000. Confirmed. Processed. I sat with that number for a moment. Let it be real. Then I called my mom. She answered on the second ring the way she always does, and I told her the whole story beginning to end. She listened without interrupting, which is not something she does often. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Baby, your grandmother would have loved this." I laughed. Actual laughing. Kind that surprises you because it comes from somewhere you didn't know was still loose. "She really would have," I said. We talked for another 40 minutes. She called me baby 7 times. I counted. Jasmine Reyes joined Kellerman Group, the firm that brought me on as a partner 3 months after all of this, 6 months after I started there. I made that happen directly, and I have no regrets about it whatsoever. She is one of the best data minds I have ever worked with, and the world runs better when good people end up in rooms where their work is actually seen. Dev Sharma called me 4 months after the settlement to let me know he had received 2 outside offers and was trying to decide what to do. I told him what I always tell smart people who are stuck somewhere they've grown past. Stay long enough to know exactly where the leverage lives. Then decide. He laughed. That sounds like something somebody told you once. It does, I said. It was good advice. Richard Okafor left the board voluntarily in the spring and started his own advisory practice. He's the kind of person who does his best work once he's no longer inside a system that keeps promoting the wrong things. He knows that now. I think he knew it before he left. Here's what I want you to sit with before this video ends. There is going to be a moment, maybe you've already had it, maybe it's coming, where a place you gave your real effort to decides that effort is worth less than the cost of honoring what they promised you. Where the people who rode your results the furthest will act like those results belong to them and the consequences belong to you. That moment is a betrayal. Call it what it is. Don't let anyone smooth it over with corporate language about restructuring and strategic pivots and nothing personal. It's personal. You gave real time and real work. Own how that feels. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that moment. It's also data. It shows you exactly who you were working for, what they valued when the money got tight, how they actually see people versus how they describe seeing them in their all-hands presentations. And it reminds you of something important. Everything you built, every skill, every relationship, every contract clause, every strategy, every piece of hard-won knowledge leaves with you when you walk out that door. They can take your badge and your parking spot and your company email. They cannot take what you know. They cannot take what you've earned. They cannot take the version of yourself that got built in the process of doing the work they benefited from. You carry that. So my advice is simple. Read the contract. All of it. Every page, every subsection, every piece of small print. If you're ever in a position to negotiate terms, negotiate them clearly and get every word initialed. Keep copies of everything in more than one place. Know your numbers, exactly what you're owed and exactly what activates what. And when they do the thing they were always going to do and they call you into a windowless conference room and slide a typed sheet across a bare table, nod once. Smile politely, hand over the badge, and go file your clause. The quiet ones always have a plan. The difference between the ones who win and the ones who don't is whether they wrote it down and made somebody sign it first. My name is Maya Carter. They fired me 23 hours before my bonus vested because they thought they were smarter than me. The bill came to $6,812,000. Best thing they ever did for me. This is silent revenge. If this story hit home, if you've ever been the hardest worker in a room that kept handing the credit to somebody else, I want to hear from you. Drop your city and what time it is right now in the comments. Let's build this community from every time zone. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Like this video if they absolutely earned every dollar of that bill. And share it with one person right now who needs to hear that being quiet doesn't mean you're not ready. And before you go, leave me one sentence in the comments. What clause would you have written for yourself? I read every single one. Every week. without fail. That's real power. That's what it looks like when you stop waiting for the system to be fair and start building your own terms. See you next week. This has been Silent Revenge. But wait, I need to go back and fill in a piece I skipped over. 'Cause the board meeting deserves its own dedicated chapter, and honestly, the full account of what happened inside that room on Friday morning is too good to summarize. Let me take you in there. Conference room on the 6th floor of Vantage Tech Solutions was called the Horizon Room. Glass walls, a long oval table, a mounted screen on the far wall for presentations. It usually got used for client pitches and quarterly planning sessions. That Friday morning, it felt like something else entirely. Felt like a courtroom where nobody wanted to be the defendant and somehow everybody was. Marcus arrived first, 3 minutes late, coffee in hand, the particular energy of a man who has been told bad news but has not yet fully decided to believe it. Sandra arrived 60 seconds after him, looking like she hadn't slept well. The CFO, Robert Haynes, came in with a printed spreadsheet and the expression of a funeral home director who's been asked to quote 2 services instead of 1. Richard Okafor took the seat at the far end, poured himself a glass of water, and didn't say anything to anyone. 2 additional board members filed in, Ted Calloway, who'd been on the board since before I started at Vantage, and a newer member named Patricia Wren, a former operations executive who had a reputation for asking the questions everyone else was trying to avoid. Claire Novak was the last one in. She closed the door, stood at the head of the table, and placed a single document in front of each person without saying a word first. She let them read. Took about 90 seconds for the room to become very, very quiet. Ted Calloway looked up first. "Walk me through the timeline," he said. Claire pulled up a projected exhibit on the screen, a clean chronological breakdown. Each event was time-stamped. The equity vest was scheduled for 9 a.m. Thursday. My termination had been processed at 9:27 a.m. Wednesday. The gap between those 2 events was 23 hours and 33 minutes. The protected window under Clause 14b was 24 hours. She was terminated inside the protected window, Claire said. The clause activates upon involuntary termination. It does not require her to petition for it, request it, or even mention it. It triggered automatically the moment HR logged her separation. Patricia Wren leaned forward. Who authorized the termination? The room went still in a way that pointed clearly in one direction. Marcus set down his coffee. I did. Sandra recommended it, I approved it. The goal was to restructure before the Q1 review and avoid a large unplanned payout on the equity schedule. Did you review her contract before authorizing the separation? Tricia asked. The silence before Marcus answered lasted 3 full seconds. We reviewed the standard separation framework. That is not what I asked, Patricia said. She said it calmly, the way a person says something when they already know the answer and are giving the other person one chance to be honest about it. Marcus did not answer. Tricia turned to Claire. What exactly are we looking at in terms of financial exposure? Robert Haynes looked at his spreadsheet. He'd run the calculation 3 times. The number had been the same all 3 times. The base bonus was $4.3 million, he said. The multiplier clause, Clause 14b, applies a 1.5 multiplier on the equity value. But here is where it gets complicated. He paused. The subsection, 14b2, indexes the payout to the equity valuation at the time of termination, not at the time of contract signing. The company's equity value has increased by 41% since the contract amendment was signed last spring. Ted Calloway closed his eyes briefly. Patricia Wren's expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. So the total, Robert continued, including the full equity acceleration, the 1.5 base salary component, benefits continuation, and indemnity provisions, comes to $6,812,000. Marcus said, That can't be right. I've run it 3 times, Robert said. Marcus looked at Claire. We counter. We offer settlement. Half the number NDA she signs, everybody walks away. Claire had clearly been waiting for him to say exactly that. I contacted her attorney this morning to gauge the temperature. Her attorney, Dana Holt, private counsel, was polite and entirely non-committal. As she told me, and I'm quoting directly, "My client is aware of her position and will be in touch when she's ready." Claire paused. That's not the language of someone who wants to negotiate. That's the language of someone who knows she doesn't have to. Richard Okafor spoke for the first time since the meeting started. She notified internal compliance before the company had even finished processing her exit paperwork, he said. He hadn't looked up from his notes. She had 3 backup copies of the contract in separate locations. She had a recording of the signing session. She had a digital alert system set up that would automatically distribute the full packet to outside parties if anyone modified her employment record. He looked up now. This was not an ambush. She told us what she had. She told us what the clause meant. She put her initials right next to ours and she waited to see if we'd be foolish enough to test it. The room sat with that. Trisha Wren asked the only question that mattered. Do we have any legitimate justification for this termination? Pam Greer, who had been sitting silently in the corner this entire time, said quietly, no documented cause. No verbal warnings. No performance coaching. No redundancy filing with HR. Her record is completely clean. Then there's no defense, Patricia said. She looked at Marcus directly. This was a breach. A documented, expensive breach with our initials on the document that caused it. The board needs to authorize the full payout today, and then we need to have a separate conversation about the decision-making process that led us here. Marcus looked around the table for an ally. He did not find one. The vote was called. Every hand went up. Marcus sat very still and stared at a point on the wall somewhere above Claire's head. He looked, in that moment, like a man doing a very private accounting of his decisions and arriving at a number he didn't like. Claire gathered her documents. I'll prepare the settlement package for distribution today. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, she gave us 3.5 years. The Drayton Forsyth account alone is projected to generate $31 million over the next 4 years. She looked at Marcus one last time. We built that number into our next investor deck. The person who built the deal that built that number walked out of this building on Wednesday morning carrying everything she knew. She left. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. Okay, I need a quick show of hands in the comments. Have you ever had a win that took a long time before it felt real? Drop a yes below. 'Cause what I felt when that settlement came through was not what I expected to feel, and I think a lot of you will relate. I want to talk about one more thing before we close this out because I think it's the most important piece of this whole story and it almost never gets mentioned when people tell versions of it. What do you do with the anger? 'Cause I had it. I want to be honest with you about that. I am a person who tends to run quiet and controlled, and I had spent so long running quiet and controlled inside that company that by the time I walked out of conference room B7 on that Wednesday morning, I had packed down about 3 years of low-level frustration so tightly that it had become something structural. Part of the architecture of how I moved through my days. The anger was real. What they did was wrong. Pattern of minimizing, sidelining, and credit absorbing that Jasmine's file documented, that was wrong. Being handed a termination notice 23 hours before vesting without a single documented reason, that was wrong. All of it was wrong, and I was angry about it in a way that I kept very carefully contained because I had learned over a long time that containment was part of survival. What I want to tell you is this: the anger is okay. The anger is appropriate. The anger is information too, just like the termination. Tells you what you valued and what you deserved and the gap between those two things in a particular place. What matters is what you do with it. I did not post about it publicly. I did not send a long email to leadership. I did not cry in that conference room or make Sandra feel anything other than vaguely uncomfortable about how composed I was. I took that energy and I put it into preparation. Into documentation. into the quiet, methodical work of making sure that every promise made to me in writing had a mechanism for being kept. I converted the anger into architecture. And then I let the architecture do the work. That is honestly the whole lesson. Anger without a plan is noise. Anger with a plan, documented in triplicate, initialed on every page, backed up in 3 separate locations with a secondary multiplier index to current market valuation, that is something else entirely. That's silence that costs people $7 million. The last thing I did before I flew to Miami was stop at a storage unit I rent near my apartment in Lincoln Park. Inside is a filing cabinet where I keep hard copies of every important document in my professional life. Contracts, amendments, performance reviews, correspondence chains, and yes, a printed and annotated copy of Clause 14B signed in blue ink with my own hand. I opened the cabinet, found the original folder, pulled out the page, read Clause 14B one more time. Then I put it back, locked the cabinet, and drove to O'Hare. On the flight to Miami, I watched the city go small below me and thought about the version of myself who had walked into Vantage Tech 4 years ago with a packed portfolio and ambitions that felt almost too big to carry around. Who had given every quarter of that time completely and honestly. Who had stayed late when she didn't have to and taken calls on weekends and built a $31 million deal on a coffee shop napkin because she genuinely cared about doing excellent work. That woman deserved what was coming to her. She got it. Just came from a different direction than expected. Before I go, I want to hear your story. Not the full thing, just a headline. One line in the comments. A time you were underestimated and came out ahead, or a time you're still waiting to. Tell me your city, tell me what time it is where you are, and tell me your headline. I read every comment on this channel every single week, and sometimes the comments section is more powerful than the video. If you watch this all the way through, you're exactly who this channel is built for. Subscribe to Silent Revenge so you don't miss the next one. Hit the like button, not for the algorithm but because they earned every penny of that bill and you know it. And share this video with one person today who's in a situation where they need to be reminded that the quiet ones always have a plan. My name is Maya Carter. I read the fine print. I wrote some of it myself. And when they came for me, I was already ready. That's what Silent Revenge is about. Building something they can't take from you. Writing your name into every clause. And letting the contract speak. See you in the next story. One final thing. For the people still here. I got a message about 2 months after everything settled from a 24-year-old woman named Aaliyah, who had just started her first real professional job. She found this story somehow. Don't ask me how the internet works, I've given up trying to understand it, and she sent me a long note asking what the single most important thing was that she should know going into her career. I thought about it for a while. 'Cause there's a lot you could say. There's so much I wish someone had told me at 24. But I kept coming back to one thing. Read the contract. Not just yours. Read them in general. Read how they're structured. Learn what constructive termination means and how it differs from termination for cause. Learn what equity acceleration is. Learn what a protected window clause looks like. Learn what a multiplier subsection does. Learn these words before you need them the way you learn what a fire extinguisher is before there's a fire. Because the people across that table from you, the ones making decisions about your career and your pay and your future, they have read those documents. Or they have people who have. And the gap between what you know about your own contract and what they know is a gap they will absolutely use if it's ever in their interest to do so. Close the gap. Write your own language where they let you. Push back where they won't. Get a private attorney if the stakes are high enough. Pay for that out of your own pocket if you have to. Dana Holt cost me a few $1,000s over 2 sessions and helped me write a clause that returned nearly $7 million. That is the best investment I have ever made. It is not even close. I also want to say this directly and clearly to anyone watching who is in a situation right now that feels unfair. Who is sitting at a desk in a company that has been quietly shrinking your contributions for years, or holding a contract you've never read all the way through, or wondering whether the thing they feel in their chest when they walk into work every morning, that tight, compressed feeling of being unseen, is just part of how work feels, or whether it's actually a signal worth paying attention to. It's a signal. Pay attention to it. Not by exploding. Not by quitting in a dramatic speech that feels great for 30 seconds and uncomfortable for the next 6 months. By getting still. By getting organized. By reading everything. By keeping copies. By building the fence before it rains. You already know what you're worth. You've known for a long time. The goal is to make sure it's written somewhere with someone else's signature on the same page. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else is just waiting for them to figure out what you already know. Drop a comment. What city, what time, and what's your one-line story? I'll be reading. Subscribe. Like. Share. You know the drill, but more than that, you know the reason. This has been Silent Revenge. Until next week. I said I'd come back to one thing, and I want to make sure I keep that promise. The morning I walked out of Vantage Tech Solutions, after the badge, after the conference room, after the elevator ride, I passed through the lobby one more time. Priya was still at the front desk. Still not making eye contact. I stopped at her desk. She looked up, startled. "Good luck," I said. "You were always one of the kindest people in this building." She looked like she might cry. I walked out through the revolving door into the February cold, turned my collar up, and kept moving. I tell that part of the story because I want you to understand something about how this kind of win is supposed to feel. Not triumphant. Not loud. Not like a movie scene where the music swells and everyone watches you go. Just clear. Calm. Clean. Like a contract clause finally doing what you wrote it to do. Like walking away from something carrying more than you brought in. That's the feeling. And it's worth all of it. Every clause. Every initial. Every annotated page. Every quiet, careful, deliberate choice to be ready instead of reactive. That's silent revenge. Not the spectacle. Not the explosion. Just the moment when the thing you built in the dark finally turns on the light. Take care of yourselves. Read your contracts. And I will see you right here, same time next week. And hey, if you're somewhere in the middle of your own story right now, if you're the person who just got that all-caps calendar invite with no explanation, or the person who's 3 years deep in a place that keeps moving the goalpost, or the person who has been the best in the room for so long that you've started to wonder if anyone's ever going to say it out loud, I want you to hear me say this clearly. You are not wrong about what you're worth. Write it down. Get it signed. Keep the copy. And when the moment comes, and it will come, be ready. That's the whole game. That is the whole entire game. Now go read your contract. All of it. Tonight. Circle every clause you don't understand. Find someone you trust who's been in the room before and get your answers. Do it before you need to. Do it while everything still feels fine. Do it quietly, carefully, in a locked drawer only you can open. 'Cause the truth is, it was never really about revenge. It was about making sure the work I put in had the same protection as the promises they made to keep me putting it in. It was about knowing that I was not just an employee, I was a party to an agreement. And that agreement had teeth. 'Cause I gave it teeth. 'Cause I stayed up late on subsection language while everyone else was celebrating. 'Cause I kept the copy. 'Cause I had the backup. 'Cause I was ready. Be ready. That is my only advice. This has been Maya Carter. This is Silent Revenge. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Like if this one hit. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city and time in the comments below. We are only just getting started here.